Commander Rylock of the Galactic Research Station Prometheus stood before the reinforced viewing window with the kind of rigid posture that suggested he had a steel rod surgically implanted where his spine should be, which, given that he was a Chithraxian, think oversized praying mantis in a lab coat, wasn't entirely out of the question. "Esteemed delegates," he began, his mandibles clicking with self-importance, "what you are about to witness represents the pinnacle of our containment technology. Behind this triple-layered energy field is the single most dangerous organism ever catalogued by the Galactic Council." The delegation, a mixture of various species who all looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere, else pressed closer to the window. Inside the containment chamber, something moved in the shadows. Something big. Something that made a sound like grinding metal and distant screaming. "The Void Reaver," Rylock continued, warming to his subject. "Responsible for the complete extinction of 3 colonial settlements. Acid blood, regenerative capabilities, telepathic fear detection, perfect predator. And we have successfully contained it for 6 standard months." He puffed up with pride, which was deeply unsettling given his exoskeleton. Meanwhile, 3 decks down in the station's break room, Jake Thompson, the only human on a station of 200 aliens, was locked in mortal combat with a coffee maker that had clearly given up on life. "Come on, you piece of junk," Jake muttered, smacking the side of the machine. He was wearing his standard maintenance jumpsuit, which was about 2 sizes too big because apparently humans weren't common enough to warrant proper sizing in station uniforms. "I just want coffee. That's it. One simple thing." The machine gurgled ominously and produced something that looked more like motor oil than anything remotely drinkable. Jake sighed and pulled out his personal thermos instead. This station had faster-than-light travel, artificial gravity, and could house 200 beings from across the galaxy, but couldn't manage a decent cup of coffee. Priorities were clearly not their strong suit. He checked his work tablet. Another 17 repair requests. The air recycler in Section 7B was making unsettling noises again, which it always did. That was just how it sounded, and someone had managed to jam the waste disposal unit in the xenobiology lab. Again. "Living the dream," Jake said to absolutely no one, because everyone else was at Rylock's big presentation and he hadn't been invited. Not that he minded. The last mandatory station gathering had been 3 hours of Rylock explaining proper sample labeling procedures in excruciating detail. He grabbed his toolbox and headed out, completely unaware that 4 decks above him, the galaxy's most dangerous predator, was about to have a very bad day with its containment field. Or a very good day, depending on your perspective. The first sign that something was catastrophically wrong came in the form of a sound that Jake's brain helpfully interpreted as every alarm on the station having a synchronized panic attack. He looked up from the Rhine, water filtration panel he'd been elbow-deep in. Red lights strobed through the corridor. The station's PA system crackled to life with Rylock's voice, which had gone from smug to shrill in record time. "Code Obsidian. Repeat. Code Obsidian. All personnel to emergency stations. The Void Reaver has breached containment." Jake blinked. The what now? But the PA had already cut off, replaced by the continued wailing of alarms that seemed determined to give everyone on board a migraine. Up in the observation deck, chaos had achieved sentience and was throwing a party. The containment field, the triple-layered, supposedly foolproof containment field, had failed in the most spectacular way possible. Which is to say, it had simply winked out of existence mid-presentation, right as Rylock was gesturing dramatically at the Void Reaver's impressive cranial structure. The creature had paused, as if it couldn't quite believe its luck. Then it had shrieked a sound that would haunt nightmares for years to come, and proceeded to tear through the reinforced chamber door like it was made of tissue paper. The delegates had scattered like startled birds. One of them, a gelatinous bloroon named Chancellor Glepp, had simply liquefied in terror and had to be collected in a bucket. "Crag!" Rylock screamed into his comm unit, all traces of dignity abandoned. "Get your security team to Observation Deck Gamma right now." Lieutenant Crag, a battle-scarred Thorgonian with 4 arms and exactly 0 patience for drama, was already mobilizing. "All units, converge on the observation deck. Lethal force is authorized. And somebody find that maintenance human and get him to a secure location." Back in the mechanical sector, Jake had discovered something far more concerning than escaped space monsters. Someone had eaten his sandwich, his labeled sandwich, the one with his name written in 3 different languages, to avoid any possible confusion. "Are you kidding me right now?" He stared into the communal fridge with the expression of a man who'd been personally betrayed. It literally said Jake's lunch, do not eat. How is that unclear? The alarms continued to blare. Jake absently wondered if maybe he should check what a code obsidian was. But honestly, They had a code something practically every other week. Last month's code Vermilion had turned out to be someone microwaving fish in the break room. He'd give it 5 minutes to see if it sorted itself out. He pulled out his comm unit and scrolled through the station manual. Code Obsidian, here we go. Catastrophic containment failure of Class X threat level organism. He glanced at the still wailing alarms. That does sound somewhat serious. Somewhere above him, the Void Reaver was, systematically shredding its way through bulkheads, leaving a trail of destruction that would take months and an unreasonable amount of paperwork to repair. Security teams were scrambling. Scientists were hiding in closets. Rylock was stress-molting, and Jake was deciding whether to file a formal complaint about his sandwich or just let it go this one time. He checked his work tablet again. The soundproofing in this section was actually pretty good. You couldn't hear the screaming at all. Probably fine, Jake decided, and went back to fixing the water filtration system. Whatever was going on, maintenance issues didn't solve themselves. Lieutenant Cragg had seen combat on 17 different worlds. He'd faced down pirates, rebels, and one particularly aggressive trade negotiation on Vorplex 9. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for following the trail of a legitimately terrified Void Reaver. This doesn't make sense, he growled into his comm, all 4 arms gripping. Various weapons. It's heading away from populated areas. Predators don't run, they hunt. Behind him, Dr. Finn, a nervous, long-eared lepida who looked like someone had given anxiety a PhD, was scanning the shredded remains of a bulkhead with trembling paws. The damage pattern is consistent with panic, not aggression. See how the claw marks are irregular? It's fleeing from something. Fleeing from what? Cragg demanded. It's the apex predator. What could possibly scare a Void Reaver? I don't know, and that terrifies me significantly more than the original problem. They followed the destruction through 3 more corridors. Sparking consoles, torn metal, one completely decimated vending machine that had apparently offended the creature somehow. The trail led deeper into the station's residential sectors. Rylock's voice crackled over the comm, having regained some composure but still noticeably higher pitched than usual. Status report. Have you contained it? Negative, Cragg responded. Still tracking. It's moving fast. Dr. Finn pulled up a schematic on his datapad, his ears drooping further with each passing second. Oh no. No. It's heading towards Section 12C. What's in 12C? Cragg asked. The human quarters. There was a moment of silence as the security team processed this information. The maintenance human? Jake? Cragg's mandibles tightened. Get me a comm link to him. Now. Static. Nothing but static. He's in a dead zone, one of the security officers reported. Those quarters weren't designed for humans. The communication relays I don't care about infrastructure problems. Rylock shrieked through the comm. Get to those quarters before that thing turns our only human into paste. Do you have any idea how much paperwork a human death involves? The Terran embassy will bury us in forms. Dr. Finn was frantically scrolling through his datapad, pulling up every piece of research ever compiled on Void Reavers. You need to understand what we're dealing with here. This creature has acid blood that can melt through deck plating. It regenerates from wounds that would kill anything else. And worst of all, it perceives fear as a hunting trigger. So what you're saying is we're all going to die, one of the security officers said flatly. Not helping, Torx, Cragg snapped. It's been observed to take its time with prey that shows fear, Dr. Finn continued, his voice getting progressively more panicked. Playing with them. The human won't stand a chance. He probably doesn't even know it's coming. The team rounded a corner and found fresh claw marks on the wall's deep gouges that were still smoking slightly. They were close. Double time, Cragg ordered, breaking into a run. If we're lucky, we'll get there before. A sound echoed through the corridor ahead. Not a scream. Not the shriek of the Void Reaver. Something else entirely. It sounded suspiciously like a sports commentator yelling about someone named Rodriguez missing an easy goal. The security team exchanged confused glances and picked up their pace, weapons raised, expecting to find the aftermath of a massacre. What they were about to find was so much worse for their understanding of the universe. The security team burst through the door to Jake's quarters with the kind of tactical precision that suggested they were prepared for anything. Bloodbath, gore, possibly some light existential horror. What they were not prepared for was sports commentary. And that's another turnover for the Earth United squad, folks. They really need to tighten up their defense in the second half. The team froze. Lieutenant Cragg's forearms went slack, weapons drooping toward the floor. Dr. Finn made a sound like a tea kettle having a stroke. Jake was sprawled on his beat-up couch, one hand holding a beer, the other casually resting on the head of the galaxy's most dangerous predator. The Void Reaver, all 7 feet of nightmare-inducing killing, machine was curled up on Jake's lap like the world's most terrifying house cat. Its eyes were half closed. It was making a sound that could only be described as purring, if purring could also shatter glass and induce minor psychological trauma. Jake glanced up at the heavily armed security team crowding his doorway. "Oh, hey, you guys see who took my sandwich from the fridge? Had my name right on it?" Nobody answered. Several security officers appeared to be experiencing some kind of critical system failure. One of them had started quietly whimpering. The Void Reaver's sensory stalks twitched, tracking the movement of the intruders, but it didn't uncurl from its position. If anything, it pressed closer to Jake, who absently scratched behind one of its auditory ridges. "Is that?" Crag started, then stopped. His translator implant actually seemed to be struggling with whatever words should come next. "That is the Void Reaver," Dr. Finn whispered, his voice barely audible. "On the human, voluntarily." "Yeah, this is Kevin," Jake said, giving the creature another pat. "Showed up about 20 minutes ago, looking pretty agitated. Think you guys stressed him out with all that noise." "You named it Kevin," Crag repeated slowly, as if testing whether those words made any more sense said out loud. "He looked like a Kevin." Jake shrugged, which caused the Void Reaver to shift slightly and emit another bone-rattling purr. "Gave him some of my beef jerky, and he calmed right down. You guys want a beer? I've got 3 more in the fridge." "The beef jerky," Dr. Finn said faintly. "You gave processed Terran meat products to an apex predator. I mean, yeah, little guy was clearly hangry." Jake took a sip of his beer. "No offense, but your containment setup is probably way too stressful. Would you want to be locked in a room with a bunch of people staring at you all day? That's just bad vibes." Commander Rylock's voice came through Crag's comm unit, frantic. "Report. Have you found the human's remains? How bad is it?" Crag slowly raised his comm unit. "Commander, you're going to want to come down here. I can't. I don't have words for what I'm looking at. Is it horrific? On a scale of 1 to 10, how traumatized should I be?" "It's not horrific, sir. It's..." Crag watched as Jake scratched under the Void Reaver's chin, causing one of its enormous back legs to kick reflexively. "It's impossible." On the couch, Jake noticed the creature's reaction and grinned. "Oh, you like that, huh, buddy?" He did it again. The Void Reaver's eyes closed completely, its massive body going limp with contentment. The security team stood there, weapons still drawn, watching a human give belly rubs to a creature that had acid blood and had personally ended 3 civilizations. The universe's understanding of threat assessment was experiencing a catastrophic failure. "So seriously, though," Jake said, looking back at the team. "About my sandwich. It was turkey and Swiss. Pretty. Distinctive. Any leads?" Behind Dr. Finn, one of the security officers fainted. Nobody moved to help him. They were all too busy watching Kevin the Void Reaver make biscuits on Jake's thigh with claws that could tear through reinforced titanium. "I'm filing this report in triplicate," Crag muttered, "and I still don't think anyone will believe me." Within 10 minutes, Jake's quarters had gone from his personal sanctuary of questionable decor and even more questionable housekeeping to what could only be described as a really awkward interspecies incident scene. Commander Rylock had arrived with half the science department, all of them crowding into the doorway like they were watching a nature documentary that had gone completely off script. Dr. Finn had pulled out every scanning device he owned, and several he'd probably borrowed without asking, all of them pointed at the Void Reaver. His paws were shaking so badly the readings kept glitching. "This is scientifically impossible," he muttered, staring at his datapad. "The creature's cortisol levels are down 70%. Its aggression markers are practically non-existent. It's in a state of what I can only describe as profound relaxation." "Maybe your scanner's broken," Jake offered helpfully, reaching over to grab another beer from the side table. The movement made Kevin shift slightly, and the entire science team collectively gasped and took a step back. But the Void Reaver just readjusted itself on Jake's lap, draping one massive clawed arm across his legs like a seatbelt made of nightmares. "The scanner is not broken, Doctor," Finn squeaked. "What I'm reading is accurate, which means somehow, impossibly, you've managed to completely pacify a Class X predator, using," he checked his notes with visible distress, "processed meat snacks and physical affection." Rylock pushed his way to the front of the group, his mandibles clicking in rapid-fire agitation. "Human Jake, I need you to explain, in detailed and precise terms, Exactly what happened from the moment the Void Reaver entered your quarters. Jake hit pause on his game. Earth United was losing anyway, and thought about it. So I was watching the match, right? And I hear this scratching at the door. Figured maybe it was Torx from engineering coming to borrow my socket wrench again. Dude never returns tools, by the way, but when I opened it, there's Kevin here looking all worked up. Worked up, Rylock repeated, his voice dangerously flat. Yeah, you know, twitchy, agitated, eyes all wild, clearly stressed about something. Jake gestured at the now peaceful creature. So I was like, hey buddy, you okay? And he kind of just stood there in the doorway doing this thing. Jake made a weird chittering sound that was probably supposed to be an imitation, but sounded more like a broken garbage disposal. Kevin's sensory stalks perked up at the sound, swiveling toward Jake with what might have been recognition or indigestion. Hard to tell with apex predators. You invited it inside, Dr. Finn said weakly. Well, yeah, couldn't just leave him in the hallway. That's rude. Jake scratched behind Kevin's auditory ridge again, which caused the creature to emit that unsettling purr that made the lights flicker. So, he comes in, still all tense and stuff, and I'm thinking, okay, this guy needs to chill out. And in my experience, there's basically nothing that can't be improved with snacks. Your experience, Rylock said. Your experience with what, exactly? Taming apex predators? Nah, just general life stuff. Like, you ever meet someone who's just in a bad mood? 9 times out of 10, they're hungry or tired. Basic problem solving. Jake pointed to the empty bag of beef jerky on the coffee table. Had that in my emergency stash. Figured, you know, protein's protein. You fed it your food, Doctor, Finn said, his voice climbing into ranges that probably only his species could hear properly. You took food out of your own supplies and offered it to a creature that could have torn you apart molecule by molecule. Jake shrugged. He didn't look like he wanted to tear me apart. He looked stressed. There's a difference. I work maintenance. I'm pretty good at reading when something's about to break versus when it just needs some adjustment. And then what happened? Rylock demanded. Then he ate the jerky pretty fast. Actually, not even chewing. Just kind of inhaled it and started calming down a bit. Still twitchy, though. So I figured maybe he needed some personal space to decompress, you know? But he kept following me around. Sat down on the couch to finish watching the game. And he just climbed up here. Jake patted Kevin's flank, which caused several scientists to flinch. Started doing that purring thing. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe this guy just needs some physical contact. Some species are like that. Some species, Crag interjected from his position by the door, all 4 arms still gripping. Weapons are emphatically not like that. The Void Reaver is a solitary creature that has been documented actively avoiding even its own kind. Documented under what conditions? Jake asked, and for the first time his voice took on something other than casual indifference. Because from what I'm seeing, you had Kevin locked in a box with bright lights and people staring at him all day. That's not observation. That's psychological torture. No wonder he freaked out when he got loose. There was a moment of silence. Uncomfortable, awkward silence that suggested Jake had maybe touched on something no one wanted to admit. Doctor, Finn's ears drooped. The containment protocols were designed for security, not welfare. Yeah, I'm getting that vibe. Jake looked down at Kevin, who had one massive eye half open, watching the room with what might have been contentment, or possibly planning everyone's demise. Still hard to tell. Look, I'm not a xenobiologist or whatever, but I fixed enough broken systems to know when something's acting up because it's broken versus when it's acting up because you're treating it wrong. Are you suggesting, Rylock said slowly, dangerously, that our entire containment methodology is flawed? I'm suggesting maybe Kevin here doesn't want to be treated like a specimen. Maybe he wants to be treated like, you know, a living thing. Jake scratched under Kevin's chin again, hitting what was apparently the sweet spot. Kevin's back leg started kicking reflexively, and his tail, which had acid-dripping spines that could punch through starship hulls, started doing a lazy wag. The tail wag sent 3 junior scientists scrambling backward into the hallway. This is absolutely unprecedented, Dr. Finn whispered, scanning furiously. The chemical analysis of the creature's proximity response to the human shows elevated oxytocin analogs. It's bonding with him. Bonding, Rylock repeated, his voice somewhere between horrified and fascinated. Yeah, we're buddies now, Jake confirmed. Honestly, he's way better company than most of you guys. Doesn't complain about my housekeeping, doesn't eat my labeled food. Just vibes. He paused. Although he did knock over my lamp earlier. But that's okay. That lamp was ugly anyway. Commander Rylock looked at Lieutenant Cragg. Cragg looked at Dr. Finn. Doctor. Finn looked at his scanner like it might provide some kind of explanation that wouldn't completely upend galactic xenobiology. I'm going to have to report this, Rylock said finally, sounding like a man who'd aged several years in the past half hour. To everyone. The Council. The Oversight Committees. The Insurance Adjusters. Cool, Jake said. Can you also report whoever took my sandwich? Because that's actually the thing I'm most annoyed about today. On his lap, Kevin the Void Reaver, the galaxy's most dangerous predator, destroyer of civilizations. The stuff of nightmares yawned widely, showing rows of crystalline teeth that could bite through solid steel. Then he closed his eyes completely and started snoring. A sound like a malfunctioning reactor, but somehow adorable in context. I'm never going to live this down, Cragg muttered. None of us are, Dr. Finn agreed. And somewhere in the back of everyone's mind, a single thought crystallized. Humanity's most terrifying ability wasn't their capacity for violence or their technological advancement. It was their apparently supernatural ability to look at literally anything in the universe and think, I could be friends with that. The incident report that Commander Rylock filed 3 hours later would go down in Galactic Council history as the single most absurd document ever submitted to the bureaucratic archives. He'd rewritten it 4 times, each version reading more like a fever dream than the last, before finally giving up and just submitting the unvarnished truth with a note that said, I am not intoxicated or experiencing a medical emergency. This actually happened. The response from Galactic Council headquarters came back in record time. Request video evidence immediately. Also, please confirm you have not been replaced by a comedy writer. By morning station time, at least word had spread through every deck. The cafeteria was buzzing with gossip. The story had already mutated into at least 7 different versions, including one where Jake had apparently wrestled the Void Reaver into submission using ancient Terran martial arts, and another where he'd mind-controlled it with forbidden human technology. The truth, somehow, was weirder than any of the rumors. Jake had reported for his maintenance shift at 0600 exactly as usual, toolbox in hand, thermos of terrible instant coffee under his arm. The only difference was the 7-foot apex predator following him like an oversized puppy. Morning, Torx, Jake said to the Rigelian engineer who'd flattened himself against the corridor wall, all 3 of his eye stalks fully, extended in alarm. Morning, Torx squeaked back, watching as Kevin padded past, his claws clicking on the deck plating. The Void Reaver paused to sniff curiously at Torx's tool belt, and the engineer made a sound like air escaping from a balloon. Kevin, leave him alone, buddy. We've got work to do. Jake kept walking, and Kevin immediately lost interest in Torx, bounding after Jake with disturbing enthusiasm. In the engineering bay, Jake knelt down to inspect a malfunctioning plasma conduit. Kevin sat next to him, watching with apparent fascination as Jake pulled out his diagnostic scanner. See, the problem with these E7 models is they use a cheap coupling mechanism that vibrates loose over time, Jake explained, apparently having decided that Kevin needed to learn about maintenance procedures. Should have been designed with a lockwasher system, but no. Someone in procurement probably saved half a credit per unit, and now we're dealing with failures every 3 months. Kevin tilted his massive head, sensory stalks swiveling to focus on the conduit. He made a questioning chirp. Exactly, Jake agreed. Like that response made perfect sense. Short-term thinking, tale as old as time. Lieutenant, Cragg walked past the engineering bay, did a double take, and just kept walking. He'd already filed his report. What happened now was above his pay grade. By mid-morning, an emergency staff meeting had been called. The conference room was packed with every department head, scientist, and administrator on the station. Commander Rylock stood at the head of the table, looking like he'd gotten maybe 20 minutes of sleep. Let me be clear about our current situation, he began, his mandibles clicking with barely suppressed frustration. The galaxy's most dangerous cataloged predator has, through circumstances that defy all scientific understanding, become emotionally attached to our human maintenance worker. Dr. Finn, your assessment? Dr. Finn stood, his ears at half-mast. He looked like he'd been awake all night, which he had. After analyzing 17 hours of behavioral data and consulting with 12 xenobiological specialists across 4 star systems, I have reached a conclusion. He paused dramatically. We have absolutely no idea what's happening. That's your professional assessment? Rylock asked flatly. Commander, the creature's neural patterns when in proximity to human Jake show markers consistent with what we would call contentment, trust, and possibly affection. These are emotional states we didn't think the Void Reaver species was capable of experiencing, let alone expressing toward another species. particularly not toward a species it should view as prey. "So, what do we do?" asked the station's medical officer, a blob-like quarian named Dr. Melch. "Well, Doctor," Finn said slowly, "the creature is calm, non-aggressive, shows no signs of distress. All biomarkers are optimal. It's actually the healthiest we've ever seen a Void Reaver in captivity." He gestured helplessly. "I suppose we let it continue?" "You want to let it continue following Jake around the station?" Rylock's voice could have cut steel. "I don't see that we have much choice, Commander. Any attempt to separate them could trigger a violent response. And frankly, the current arrangement seems to be working. The creature hasn't attacked anyone, hasn't damaged any equipment. It destroyed 3 bulkheads during the initial breach. While it was panicking, yes. Since making contact with human Jake, it's been perfectly docile." Rylock slumped in his chair, which was difficult to do with an exoskeleton. Fine. The Void Reaver is officially reassigned to human quarters. Indefinitely. Lieutenant Cragg, have your security team monitor the situation. Dr. Finn, I want hourly behavioral reports. And someone please draft a memo explaining to the rest of the crew why they're going to be seeing a Class X Predator in the commissary line." "Already drafted, sir," his assistant said quietly. "Also, the Terran embassy called. They've heard about the incident and want to send an observer team to study human Void Reaver interactions. They seemed extremely excited." "Of course they are," Rylock muttered. "Humans." Down in Section 7B, Jake had finished repairing the air recycler and was moving on to the waste disposal unit. Kevin was lying nearby, watching with rapt attention as Jake explained the finer points of blocked filtration systems. "Now here's where people usually mess up," Jake said, reaching into the mechanism with a wrench. "They try to force it when it's jammed, but that just makes it worse. You've got to ease it. Feel where the pressure point is. There we go." Something clinked, and the disposal unit hummed back to life. Kevin made an approving rumble. "Thanks, buddy. Couldn't have done it without you." Jake wiped his hands on his jumpsuit and checked his work tablet. "Okay, we've got 14 more jobs on the list. Think we can knock out at least 10 before lunch." Kevin stood and stretched, his spine crackling in a way that would have been terrifying if Jake was capable of being terrified, which he apparently wasn't. The creature moved to Jake's side, bumping his head against Jake's shoulder in what was unmistakably an affectionate gesture. They headed down the corridor together, Jake whistling tunelessly, Kevin's claws clicking on the deck plating. A group of junior technicians saw them coming and scrambled into a side passage. "They're gonna have to get used to you eventually," Jake said. "Can't keep running away every time you walk by." "You're not even doing anything threatening," Kevin chirped, which might have been agreement or might have been a request for more beef jerky. Hard to say. In her office, Station Administrator Velox was updating the crew roster in the official database. She paused at Jake's entry, stared at it for a long moment, then added a line under Special Accommodations. "Emotional. Support Void Reaver," she typed. Then she deleted it, then typed it again. Then, with a sigh of someone who had given up on the universe making sense, she saved the file. 3 weeks later, Kevin had become a fixture of station life. People still gave him a wide berth. You couldn't undo millions of years of survival instinct overnight, but the terror had faded to nervous acceptance. He attended Jake's maintenance rounds like clockwork. He'd been observed napping in the human quarters common area. Once, he'd accidentally tripped a security alarm by attempting to follow Jake into a restricted area, and the resulting standoff had ended with Jake explaining to Kevin why he couldn't come into the reactor core. "Too much radiation, buddy. It's not good for you," and Kevin apparently understanding and waiting outside. The Galactic Council had sent 3 separate investigation teams. All of them had arrived skeptical and left deeply confused, with footage of Jake giving Kevin belly rubs, and explaining why the station's power distribution system was honestly a mess. Whoever designed this never had to maintain it. Rylock's final report to the Council had been succinct. Humans possess an apparently supernatural ability to befriend anything. Recommend updating threat assessment protocols to include potential diplomatic asset alongside inadvisable to anger. And Jake? Jake was just happy he'd finally found someone on the station who appreciated his beef jerky stash and didn't steal his sandwiches. Kevin had eaten 3 sandwiches the previous week, but that was different. Kevin asked first. Well, not asked exactly. More like looked at Jake with those giant predatory eyes until Jake sighed and handed over half his lunch. But still, it was the principle of the thing. "Come on, Kev," Jake said, heading toward the lift with his toolbox. Someone reported a weird smell in the botanical lab, probably just decomposing plant matter, but we should check it out. Kevin followed, his massive form somehow managing to look eager. Behind them, a maintenance request popped up on the station's system. "Can we get more beef jerky in the commissary?" Asking for a friend. The friend was 7 feet tall, had acid blood, and had single-handedly proven that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their resilience. It was their absolute inability to recognize when something should be scary. And honestly, the galaxy was starting to think that might actually be their most terrifying trait of all.